It was a cold, quiet evening when I found myself babysitting my neighbor's two kids, Lily and Max. Their parents had gone to a formal dinner in the city, leaving me in charge of the old creaky house. The kids were easy enough to handle, playful and energetic but well-behaved. We spent the first part of the evening playing on the Xbox in the living room until bedtime approached. As I tucked them into their shared bedroom, Lily, the eldest, clung to her blanket and whispered, "Don't leave the door open too wide. He doesn't like it when it's open." I froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Max giggled nervously, pulling the blanket over his head. "She's just trying to scare you," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. I smiled, brushing it off as typical kids' antics. "Good night, Lily, good night, Max," I said, kissing them on their foreheads before shutting the door, leaving it open just a crack. Downstairs, the house felt unnervingly quiet. The wind howled faintly outside, rattling the windows. I settled onto the couch and flipped on the TV for some background noise, trying to shake off the eerie atmosphere. As the minutes ticked by, the uneasy silence began to press down on me. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you were being watched. A sudden, muffled sound caught my attention, a light thud from upstairs. My stomach sank. I grabbed my phone, its comforting glow in stark contrast to the dark room around me. Slowly, I made my way up the creaky staircase, the floorboards groaning under each cautious step. The hallway was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the kids' nightlight leaking through the partially open bedroom door. "Lily? Max?" I called softly, trying not to alarm them. No response. I peeked into their room and saw them both sound asleep, their tiny forms undisturbed beneath the covers. The thud couldn't have come from them. I turned to leave but stopped dead in my tracks. There, at the end of the hallway, a shadow moved. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I was certain I saw it. My breath hitched, and my hands gripped the phone tighter. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped into the hallway. "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded braver than I felt. The silence stretched uncomfortably long, and just as I began to convince myself it was my imagination, I heard it, a faint, slow tapping coming from the bathroom. I approached cautiously, my pulse pounding in my ears. The door was ajar, and the sound grew louder with every step. When I finally pushed it open, the room was empty. The tapping was coming from the window, it was loose and rattling in the wind. Relieved but still unsettled, I locked the window, hoping it would put an end to the strange noises. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of something in the mirror that made my blood run cold. It was a face staring at me from the darkness of the hallway behind me. Pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My breathing grew shallow, my legs trembling as I backed out of the bathroom. A sudden crash downstairs shattered the quiet. My instincts screamed to grab the kids and run, but first, I had to see what caused the noise. I hurried back down, clutching the railing for support. The living room was a mess, the lamp was smashed, and the front door was wide open, swinging in the wind. Had I locked it? I couldn't remember. My mind raced. "Lily? Max?" I shouted, bolting back up the stairs. The bedroom was empty. The blankets were tossed aside, and the window was wide open. I ran to the window, looking out into the dark yard below. There was no sign of them, only a faint trail of footprints in the fresh snow, leading toward the woods. I ran outside to see if I could see them. The street was dark and empty. I turned back walking towards the house. And then, from behind me, a voice whispered, "You left the door open too wide." The days following that terrifying night were a blur of police reports, restless sleep, and an unshakable paranoia that lingered no matter where I went. A missing persons report was put out for Lily and Max. All around the local area missing persons posters were put up. My parents tried to reassure me, but the man's face haunted my every thought, his wild, searching eyes and a faint mumbling that seemed almost otherworldly. I stopped babysitting entirely, refusing to even stay home alone. Weeks passed, and just as I began to think the nightmare was behind me, something strange happened. I was in the kitchen one evening, helping my mom prepare dinner. The windows overlooked our backyard, which stretched into the dense woodland. As I rinsed vegetables at the sink, movement caught my eye. It was subtle, a flicker of something just beyond the tree line. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a deer or some other animal. But as I stared, the sinking feeling in my stomach returned. A dark figure stood partially concealed among the trees, its outline barely visible in the dimming light. I froze, gripping the edge of the sink so tightly my knuckles ached. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. "Are you okay?" My mom's voice startled me, and I nearly dropped the tomato in my hand. I forced a smile and nodded, not wanting to alarm her. But I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me for the rest of the evening. That night, the unease turned into something much worse. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when a faint tapping sound echoed through the house. It was subtle, irregular, like someone gently knocking on glass. My pulse quickened as I sat up, straining to pinpoint the source of the noise. It wasn't coming from the front door, it was closer. Much closer. It was coming from the window in my room. My throat tightened as I turned my head toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but the faint outline of a shadow loomed behind them. My body froze, every instinct screaming at me to stay still. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, was outside knew I was there. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I reached for my phone on the bedside table and dialed 911. My hands shook as I whispered my address to the operator, barely able to keep my voice steady. She assured me that officers were on their way, but it would take time. Time I wasn't sure I had. The tapping stopped. For a brief moment, silence filled the room, so heavy it felt suffocating. Then, the shadow moved, sliding away from the window. My relief was short-lived. A new sound filled the air, the faint creak of footsteps on the wooden deck just outside the back door. I slipped out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat I kept propped in the corner of my room. My heart pounded as I crept down the hallway, careful to avoid the spots that creaked. The footsteps grew louder, now inside the house. Whoever it was had gotten in. The living room light flickered, then went out entirely, plunging the house into darkness. I pressed my back against the wall, gripping the bat so tightly my hands ached. The sound of labored breathing reached my ears, raspy and uneven. It was close, too close. Then, a voice. Low and guttural, it whispered a single phrase that sent a chill down my spine: "You didn't lock the window." I turned to run, but a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I screamed, swinging the bat wildly, but the room seemed to spin around me. The last thing I saw before everything went black was his face, inches from mine, those same wild eyes, filled with something far worse than madness. When I woke up, the police were there, voices swirling around me in a haze. They told me I was lucky. They'd arrived just in time, and when he seen us he took off running. He had escaped again, the police gave chase, but he disappeared into the woodland behind my house, they explained. The same man that you described seeing when the kids were taken. This time, though, he wasn't mumbling incoherent words. He'd been whispering my name. I know why he came back. He knew I had seen his face, and he wanted to silence me for good. I was the only person that could connect him to the crime. The next morning the police started a manhunt to try and find him. There were helicopters in the sky, police with dogs on the ground, and loads of people that lived in the local area searching the woodlands behind my home. After what seemed like forever, I started seeing police officers leaving the woodlands. I could not believe my eyes. They found Lily and Max. The man was keeping them in an underground bunker which he had made. One of the police dogs alerted his handler to their whereabouts. The man was never caught, he was never seen again. But sometimes late at night I get the feeling when I am walking home. He is watching me, just waiting for the right time to strike. Ready for spine-chilling tales that will haunt your thoughts? Subscribe to Forgotten Storyteller for eerie narrations, unsettling mysteries, and haunting stories you won't forget. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story, because some stories refuse to stay buried. Join us, if you dare.